7, 6, 11, 5, 9 and 20 miles today, 4, 11, 17, 32 the day before. Boots, 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 moving up and down again. There's no discharge in the war. Don't.
What you're listening to is a reading of Boots by the poet Rudyard Kipling. His response to an 1899 war strips away the glory of battle, revealing the madness that plagued soldiers. He immortalizes this with a simple line.
There's no discharge in the war.
Kipling's poem is no doubt a reaction to his time, but we've actually seen a lot of examples like this already. Huxley, Kafka, and Orwell wrote in fear of totalitarianistic uprisings. The lost generation between the two world wars gave rise to Camus' absurdism. Faulkner and Fitzgerald captured scenes from America in beautiful and insightful prose. But that's all 50 years before where we are going. In the 1940s and beyond, there's World War II, the Vietnam War, and the Cold War, which creates a lot of literature to talk about. Alright, I promise that this is the start of my actual presentation, and we're starting with World War II. But before I get into some examples, I did want to ask you a question, and you can take a second to think about it. But the question is, how much of our current day culture is based off of or referencing World War II? I would imagine that it's actually a lot more than you might initially think. There are some straightforward examples. Oppenheimer, a movie all about the creation of the atomic bomb. Sound of Music, I'm assuming most of you have seen that movie.
The hills are alive with the sound of music.
That's all about escaping the Nazi regime. But also, Nueva's 9th grade trip to Manzanar is all about the Japanese internment camp, which were a product or a consequence of World War II. There's some other movies like Inglourious Bastards, Schindler's List,
I could have got one more person.
and Dunkirk that are really famous titles based off of World War II. But also some more subtle references like Keep Calm and Carry On, which was actually British propaganda during World War II that became, for me, it became a walkathon slogan, in a sense, for my elementary school, which is kind of crazy to think about. There's Never Again, referencing the Holocaust. We Can Do It, which is considered like the pinnacle of American patriotism. There were also the Nuremberg trials, which led to a bunch of health and science ethics that we still use today, that are at the very core of our scientific principles. And also, Captain America was actually American propaganda all the way back in the 1940s. And now, Captain America today, think about Marvel, right? So there are a lot of references in current day culture, or at least culture in the last, couple of decades, from World War II. That makes sense because World War II was such a prominent time. It was such a devastating war. But in terms of literature, I don't want to go too deep into everything I read, but I do want to highlight one example that I found extremely interesting. And this book is called Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut, and it's honestly one of my favorite books that I've ever read, because it's such a weird and quirky book. It's not like a World War II book you'd expect. In fact, Kurt Vonnegut is considered a satirist, and so the book follows a person who's recalling their experience in World War II. Specifically, they're a prisoner of war captured in Dresden. So Dresden is a German city. And through a bunch of crazy religious humor, so they create a fake religion, they recall events in fragmented ways, they recall people in fragmented ways, they dissociate from death. So Kurt Vonnegut describes the firebombing of Dresden by American soldiers and American planes. And the reason why this is so surprising to me is, first, the magnitude of death that occurred during this war. I mean, of course, there was a lot of death, right? But if you think about the effects it has on the actual people, it's remarkably terrible. I mean, in this book, Kurt Vonnegut, after every instance of death, which happens every page, he follows every line of death, like, so-and-so was blown up by a bomb, so it goes. And that so it goes becomes so monotonic, it becomes so normalized that death becomes kind of meaningless. And that reflects the sentiments of a soldier traumatized by war. And another thing is the firebombing of Dresden caused a lot of civilian deaths, almost 25,000 deaths. And when we look at what is most remembered from the war, when we look at the atomic bombs dropped by the United States, I mean, those caused a lot, upwards of 100,000 deaths. But what Kurt Vonnegut is also trying to say is that's not the only horror of war. War itself, the bombing of civilians, are tragic, even when it's not an atomic bomb. So one thing that Vonnegut reminds us is that it's not just the atomic bomb that created a lot of trauma and a lot of death in the war. And he's using Dresden as an example. But aside from one of my favorite books of all time, Slaughterhouse-Five, there were a bunch of other excellent books that talked about the legacy of World War II, or in some way revealed it unintentionally. So one of them, of course, we read for English is Ceremony, talking about the PTSD. That's not the only book that talks about PTSD. But there's also The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, which is focusing on mental health and disillusionment after World War II. I mean, that one's particularly scary because Sylvia Plath was an author who committed suicide 1 month after the book was published by sticking her head in an oven. We can see that mental health was a big, big deal after World War II. And in terms of anti-war sentiment, there was quite a bit of it before the war, but after Pearl Harbor, I mean, it was very hard to argue for an anti-war point of view. The Vietnam War was from 1955 to 1975, roughly. And this was a remarkable war. Not in the sense that there was a lot of destruction, which there was, but more so that it was an extremely unpopular war for the United States. In fact, I briefly mentioned that in World War II, there was an anti-war sentiment, but after Pearl Harbor, all of that died away. In Vietnam, during the war, there was really, really strong and increasing anti-war sentiment. One of the first instances of anti-war counter-revolution. And this was definitely captured by the literature of the time. For example, one of the books I read was Going After Cacciato by Tim O'Brien, and he's writing about a group of soldiers that are chasing after a deserter. And so this deserter, who's named Cacciato, is trying to run from Vietnam west to Paris to escape the war, of course. And throughout the course of their chase or their journey, Cacciato is always pleasant, he's always nice, and he's always happy because he's escaping to a place that he wants to be instead of in the war. And eventually the group of soldiers realize that they feel the same way, and they really don't like the war. And the ending is really, really depressing and really shocking, and I don't want to spoil it, but this book truly reflects how much Tim O'Brien or the American public disliked the Vietnam War. But also, in English, we read The Best We Could Do, which is about escaping the destruction of the Vietnam War. And in general, this period is remarkable because all the literature and the culture from the Vietnam War is pretty much completely against the war in the first place. And literature is not just books. When you think of things that are written, that also includes movies and musicals. So one of the most famous musicals about the Vietnam War is Miss Saigon. And here's a clip. Way too much to talk about for the Cold War, so this is going to be a really condensed version. But in general, I would say the reaction to the Cold War, which, by the way, lasted a really long time, so there's not really a single event, but the reaction was a fear that the competition between the United States and Russia would lead to destruction. Of course, some of that was literal destruction. You had atomic bombs on both sides, you had nuclear weapons, but also more of like a destruction of humanity as well. So just to highlight a few prominent novels or writings from the decade, we have 1984 by George Orwell, which is about censorship. There's a really horrific short story called I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, which references the Cold War leading to humanity's destruction. You may have watched the movie The Hunt for Red October, which was a Cold War book. Kurt Vonnegut also wrote Cat's Cradle, which is super funny, at the same time super devastating. Fahrenheit 451 is about the Cold War. The Crucible is actually about the Cold War. But I want to highlight a clip from Chess, which is a musical about chess players, one of them American, one of them Soviet. And I want to highlight how their competition leads to intense struggle for both of them.
I'm only teasing Soviets with gentle bonhomie, and you've a better reason to be anti them than me.
There's a time and there's a place.
Well, how about here and now? Are you for me or are you for him?
There's a time and there's a place.
1956, Budapest is rising. 1956, Budapest is rising.
And there's so much more to talk about. I mean, we've really only covered some select instances of select culture from this really long and very important period in time. But that's all the time I have for today. So thank you so much for listening to this presentation. Bye-bye.